for over 10,000 years across every civilization that has ever existed on this planet. From the ancient Sumerians to modern Silicon Valley, from isolated tribes in the Amazon to the halls of Harvard University, one idea has dominated human thought like no other: the concept of God. Not just a God, but the God. The all-powerful, the all-knowing, the perfectly good. This isn't some fringe belief system we're talking about. This is the foundational pillar that has shaped our laws, our art, our entire understanding of reality itself. Billions of people stake their lives on it. Wars have been fought over it. Civilizations have risen and fallen defending it. And here's the thing. We're often told this is a matter of faith, a belief that exists beyond the reach of logic and reason, that science and religion occupy separate spheres that can never truly intersect. But what if I told you that this entire framework is built on a lie? What if I told you that we don't need faith, or science, or philosophy, or theology? We just need basic mathematics. Simple, undeniable logic. What if I told you that the existence of an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good God is not just unlikely, but is a literal mathematical impossibility, as impossible as 1 equaling 2, as contradictory as a square circle? Today, I'm going to walk you through a devastating 3-part mathematical proof, using nothing but the tools of logic that you learned in grade school, that demonstrates beyond any shadow of a doubt why such a being cannot, and I mean cannot, exist in any possible reality. This isn't about attacking anyone's personal beliefs. This is about following mathematical truth wherever it leads us. And if you're ready to see exactly why the numbers themselves rule out an all-powerful God, then hit that subscribe button, because the proof starts right now, with the most important definitions you'll ever hear. Let's start with the most intuitive property of God: power, the very foundation of divine authority. And I'm going to pose a question that sounds almost childishly simple, but is actually a devastating logical trap that has puzzled theologians for over 1,000 years. Can God create a stone so heavy that he himself cannot lift it? Now, I want you to really think about this for a moment. It sounds like a riddle your philosophy professor might throw at you to be clever. But this isn't a riddle. This isn't wordplay. This is a formal mathematical proof, disguised as a simple question. Because here's what makes this question so devastating. There are only 2 possible answers: yes or no. That's it. Those are your only options. Let's work through the mathematics. If the answer is yes, God can create such a stone, then by the very definition of what we just described, he cannot lift it. There is now something in existence that is beyond his power. Therefore, he is not omnipotent. There is something he cannot do. But if the answer is no, he cannot create this stone, then again, by definition, there is something he cannot do. He has failed to accomplish a task. He is limited. He is not all-powerful. Both possible answers lead to the exact same logical conclusion. God cannot be omnipotent. This isn't a trick question with a clever workaround. This is a closed mathematical loop with no escape. It's what logicians call a formal contradiction. As severe and inescapable as claiming that 1 equals 2. The very concept of unlimited, absolute omnipotence is logically incoherent. It's like asking someone to draw a square circle or introduce you to a married bachelor. The words sound meaningful when you say them, but they describe absolutely nothing that can possibly exist in reality. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You've heard the apologetic responses to this. Theologians have spent centuries trying to escape this trap. They'll say things like, well, God can do anything that is logically possible, but he can't do logically contradictory things. Or they'll perform even more desperate logical backflips and claim that God can indeed do the logically impossible, that the rules of reason themselves simply don't apply to him. But here's the problem with that second move. This appeal to mystery, this claim that God transcends logic, doesn't solve the problem. It completely explodes it into an even bigger and more devastating problem. Because if logic doesn't apply to God, if he operates outside the bounds of reason, then we can no longer use rational arguments to justify anything he does, or more importantly, anything he doesn't do. Think about what this means in practice. When a child dies of cancer, and someone says, God works in mysterious ways, they've just admitted that we cannot apply logical concepts like good or loving to God's actions. Because goodness, love, justice, these are logical concepts. If God transcends logic, then calling him good becomes meaningless. It's just a sound we make with our mouths. This isn't abstract philosophical hair-splitting. This directly affects how we evaluate suffering in the real world. And we'll return to that devastating implication in just a moment. More paradoxes of absolute power. But first, let's see just how deep this logical rabbit hole goes. Because the stone paradox is just the beginning. Can God create another omnipotent being? Think about it. If he can, then there are now two all-powerful entities in existence. But that's impossible. Two beings cannot both have ultimate power over the same reality. One would have to be able to overrule the other, which means the other isn't truly omnipotent. Can God change his own nature? If he can, then he might change from being all good to being evil. But then he's no longer the perfect God we defined. If he can't, then there's something he cannot do. So he's not omnipotent. Can God create genuine randomness? If he creates truly random events, then he doesn't know what will happen next. That contradicts his omniscience. If he can't create randomness, then he's not omnipotent. Do you see the pattern emerging here? Every single aspect of absolute power, when examined mathematically, contains internal contradictions. It's not that we haven't found the right definition of omnipotence yet. It's that the concept itself is fundamentally broken. Absolute power is mathematically impossible, just like absolute zero temperature or infinite density. These aren't just hard to achieve. They represent logical boundaries that cannot be crossed. The mathematics of reality simply does not permit unlimited power. But here's where this gets really interesting. Even if we were willing to ignore all these logical problems, even if we said, fine, let's just accept mystery and contradiction, the real world provides us with devastating empirical evidence that tears apart the entire concept of an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good God. Because when we look around us, when we examine the observable facts of our reality, the equation simply doesn't balance. Now we move from abstract logical contradictions to the brutal mathematics of reality itself. This is where we can write out a proof so simple, so devastating, it can be expressed as a basic equation. And unlike the paradoxes of omnipotence, this isn't about theoretical possibilities. This is about observable, empirical evidence. Data you can see with your own eyes. Let me lay out the 3 premises that form this mathematical proof. Premise 1. An omnipotent God, by definition, could prevent all evil. He has unlimited power. He could stop every instance of suffering, instantly, completely, with 0 effort. Premise 2. An omniscient God, by definition, would know about all evil. He has perfect knowledge of past, present, and future. Every single instance of pain, before it even happens. There can be no surprises, no blind spots. Premise 3. An omnibenevolent God, by definition, would want to prevent all evil. He is perfectly good, perfectly loving. A being of infinite compassion would have the desire, the overwhelming motivation to eliminate suffering. So we have the power, the knowledge, and the will, everything necessary to prevent evil. Now, look around you. Look at our world. Evil exists. Suffering exists. Pain exists. This is not a philosophical claim. This is observable, empirical fact. Therefore, the conclusion is mathematically inescapable. A being with all 3 of those properties cannot exist. The equation does not balance. If A and B and C are true, then D cannot be true. But D is demonstrably true. Therefore, A, B, and C cannot all be true simultaneously. The math is that simple. Now, theologians have responses to this. They call them theodicies. They argue that suffering serves some greater purpose, that it builds character, that it's a consequence of free will, that it's part of some grand plan we can't understand. But here's where the mathematics become truly devastating. Because we are not talking about suffering that serves a purpose. We are talking about gratuitous evil, pointless suffering, agony that accomplishes absolutely nothing. Let me give you some examples, and I want you to think about what possible greater good these could serve. A 5-year-old child dying slowly of bone cancer, screaming in agony for months before death. That does not build character. That is not a lesson. That is pure, unadulterated torture of an innocent. A tsunami, wiping out an entire village of people who were living peaceful, loving lives. That's not moral education. That's a random geological event causing mass death. Genetic diseases that condemn people to decades of excruciating pain from the moment they're born. Alzheimer's disease, slowly erasing a person's mind while their family watches helplessly. Birth defects that cause lifelong agony and early death. Now, here's the critical mathematical insight. If we calculate the sheer volume, the intensity, and the complete pointlessness of so much suffering, it acts as statistical proof against a benevolent designer. Think about it this way. If there were a loving God who occasionally allowed suffering for greater purposes, what would we expect the distribution to look like? We'd expect suffering to be rare, targeted, and clearly connected to moral or spiritual growth. Instead, what do we observe? We observe suffering that is random, widespread, often concentrated on the most innocent, and frequently serves no conceivable purpose whatsoever. The distribution of suffering in our world is exactly, and I mean exactly, what we would expect in a universe with no divine oversight, no loving plan, no cosmic justice, just the brutal mathematics of physics, biology, and chance. But let's be thorough. Let's examine the most common defenses and see how they crumble under mathematical analysis. The free will defense. This claims that God allows evil because he gave humans free will. And intervening would violate that gift. First problem, this doesn't explain natural disasters, diseases, or genetic defects. These have nothing to do with human choice. Second problem, an omnipotent God could create beings who have free will, but who freely choose to do good. There's no logical contradiction there. Third problem, we now know that brain tumors, chemical imbalances, and neurological disorders can cause violent behavior. Where's the free will in biological malfunction? The defense collapses under the weight of neuroscience, the soul-making defense. This argues that suffering is necessary for spiritual growth, for building character and compassion. But here's the mathematical problem. This could be achieved with a fraction of the suffering we actually observe. You don't need childhood leukemia to learn compassion. You don't need genocide to understand justice. An omnipotent being could create character-building challenges that don't involve torturing innocents. And what about victims who never get the chance to grow? Babies who die in agony? Animals who suffer without any capacity for moral development? The math doesn't add up. The suffering is vastly disproportionate to any conceivable benefit. The greater good defense. This claims that God allows temporary suffering for some ultimate greater good we can't comprehend. But think about this mathematically. What greater good could possibly justify infinite torture? What benefit could outweigh unlimited agony? And remember, we're dealing with an omnipotent God. He could achieve any greater good without causing suffering. He could skip the torture and go straight to the benefit. The fact that he doesn't is evidence that he either can't or won't, or simply doesn't exist. Let me frame this as a probability problem. In Bayesian reasoning, we update our beliefs based on observable evidence. The probability that a loving God exists, given this much gratuitous suffering, approaches zero. It's like flipping a coin and getting heads 10,000 times in a row. Technically possible, but so astronomically unlikely that any rational person would conclude the coin is rigged. Think about it like insurance mathematics. Insurance companies calculate risk based on observable patterns. No rational actuary, looking at the distribution of suffering in our world, would bet on the existence of a loving, all-powerful God. The data simply doesn't support that hypothesis. The expected outcomes in a world with a benevolent deity versus a world without one are dramatically different, and our world matches the godless prediction with devastating accuracy. But even if you're still not convinced by the logic of omnipotence or the statistics of suffering, there's one more proof that makes this personal. One that doesn't rely on abstract philosophy or global statistics. One that you can verify right now in your own experience. This final proof is the most personal of all because it doesn't rely on abstract paradoxes or global statistics about suffering. It relies on something you can verify right now in your own experience. The deafening silence of God. Here's the setup. If God truly exists as defined, if he is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving, then he would have an overwhelming reason to make his existence crystal clear to every human being. Not vague, not mysterious, not requiring interpretation. Absolutely, undeniably clear. Let me walk you through the mathematical logic. An omnibenevolent God, a perfectly loving God, would want every single person to know him. Perfect love means caring about everyone equally. It means wanting relationship, Connection. It means not wanting anyone to be lost or confused about his existence. An omniscient God, an all-knowing God, would know exactly how to reveal himself to you. Personally, he would know your psychology, your history, your exact combination of evidence and experience that would convince you beyond any shadow of a doubt. He would know which words to use, which events to orchestrate, which miracles to perform. And an omnipotent God, an all-powerful God, could make that revelation happen, instantly, for everyone, simultaneously, with zero ambiguity. He could write his name in the stars. He could speak directly into every human mind. He could perform undeniable miracles witnessed by billions. He has unlimited power to communicate. So if all three of these properties are true, what should we observe? We should observe universal, clear, undeniable knowledge of God's existence. Instead, what do we actually observe? The exact opposite. We observe widespread, sincere non-belief, and not just casual disbelief. We observe millions of people who desperately want to believe, who pray every night, who beg for a sign, who would give anything for proof, and they are met with absolute silence. Let's run the numbers on this. There are approximately 1.1 billion non-religious people on Earth right now. Many of them grew up in religious households. They wanted to believe. They tried to believe. They asked for guidance. They prayed sincerely. They sought spiritual experiences, and they received nothing. Now, if God existed as defined, what's the probability that all these sincere seekers would receive zero response? It approaches zero. It would be like a loving parent playing hide and seek with their child and never responding when the child cries out in fear. What loving parent would do that? But it gets worse, because the religious experiences that people do report are culturally specific and often contradictory. Christians have visions of Jesus. Muslims experience Allah. Hindus encounter Krishna. But notice, Christians almost never have genuine experiences of Allah. Muslims rarely encounter Jesus. Hindus don't typically experience the Christian God. If there were one true God revealing himself, we'd expect consistency. Instead, we see exactly what we'd expect if these experiences are psychological, cultural, and entirely human in origin. Every sincere prayer that goes unanswered, every desperate plea for guidance that receives silence, every earnest seeker who finds nothing, represents Bayesian evidence against God's existence. Each instance updates the probability downward. And we're not talking about dozens of cases. We're talking about hundreds of millions of data points, all pointing in the same direction. The mathematics of divine hiddenness is a probability nightmare for theism. Now, the standard response to this is that God is testing our faith, that believing without evidence is somehow more virtuous than believing with evidence. But this defense crumbles under logical analysis. First, a perfect being wouldn't need to test anything. An omniscient God already knows who would pass the test and who would fail. So what's the point of the test? Second, if some people fail this test, if they end up not believing due to lack of evidence, then God is allowing people to be damned for his own refusal to provide evidence. That's not omnibenevolent. That's cruel. Third, testing implies uncertainty about the outcome. But God is supposed to know everything. Testing contradicts omniscience. And here's the final mathematical nail in the coffin. If faith without evidence is more virtuous, then the most virtuous people would be those who believe the most absurd things with the least evidence. But that's not virtue. That's gullibility. It would mean God rewards irrationality and punishes people for using the rational minds he supposedly gave them. The logic doesn't compute. The silence equation, like every other aspect of classical theism, contains internal mathematical contradictions. An all-loving God who hides from his children, an all-knowing God who needs to test what he already knows, an all-powerful God who can't figure out how to communicate clearly. None of it adds up. The most reasonable explanation for divine silence is that there's nobody there to speak. The phone line to heaven was never connected in the first place. And when we combine this personal evidence with the logical paradoxes and the problem of suffering, we get a complete mathematical picture that's impossible to ignore. Let's bring these three devastating threads together and see the complete picture they form. The omnipotence paradox showed us that the core definition itself is mathematically impossible. Absolute power is a self-contradictory concept, like a square circle. The problem of evil showed us that observable evidence from the real world contradicts the claim of perfect goodness. The distribution of suffering is exactly what we'd expect in a godless universe. And divine hiddenness showed us that the silence we experience contradicts the claim of perfect love. No truly loving being would hide from those desperately seeking them. Three independent mathematical proofs, all reaching the exact same conclusion. Together, they form an irrefutable chain of logic that cannot be broken. Now, some will retreat into familiar refuges. They'll say, God works in mysterious ways. But that's abandoning the very definition we started with. You can't define God as all good, then appeal to mystery when goodness becomes inconvenient. They'll claim human logic is limited, but you can't use logic to build your entire theological framework, then dismiss logic when it proves you wrong. That's intellectual dishonesty. They'll insist faith transcends reason. But if reason doesn't apply, then you have no grounds for any theological claims whatsoever, including the claim that God is good. This isn't humanity's loss. This is our liberation. It means we are not subjects in some cruel cosmic experiment. We are not being tested by a hidden puppet master. We are the architects of our own meaning, the authors of our own purpose. We are responsible for reducing suffering through reason and compassion, for building justice through human effort, for seeking truth through evidence and logic. The equation doesn't balance. The mathematics are clear. The existence of an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good God is not a mystery. It is a mathematical impossibility. If this logical journey has opened your eyes to the power of reason, then subscribe for more content that fearlessly follows the evidence, wherever it leads. The proof is complete.